Hello, this video is about compost in your garden, composting, and everything I've learned about composting that I would want to share with the home gardener. So, why do you need it and how do you do it right? Here's a little table of contents overview of what we will cover. We'll talk about soil fertility, how composting is a natural cycle, and how it actually helps serve us by allowing us to do less work in the future. And then we'll talk about how to compost, the different ways that you can compost. There's myriad ways. And then the composting methods that you might want to try. So we offer five, and there are different names for them, and they're different variations of the ones we offer. We just offer you five templates from which to start you off. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some frequently asked questions about composting. And I hope that this is everything you need to know about composting in this article. So number one, why do we need compost in your garden? Three main reasons: to create soil fertility, to close the loop and give back to the earth what was taken from it, and to work less. I think those are the main three reasons that we want to compost. There's an ecosystem below ground that supports the ecosystem above ground. And for every gardener and farmer, growing food comes down to one crucial element, which is the soil. Composting converts lifeless dirt rather, into black gold. Number one thing it does, it enhances microbial life. And because microbial life is enhanced, you make nutrients more bioavailable to the plants that you grow in, nutrients that are already available in the ground. If your composting process involves the addition of nutrients in the things that you're composting, then naturally you're also adding nutrients. Some people say, oh, composting doesn't add nutrients, but if the materials that you're using to compost are rich in nutrients, then you will have a nutrient-rich compost. And then another thing that happens to create this soil fertility is that improved structure of the soil. Physically, you can see that your soil is improving when it retains more water. It doesn't just run off and remains dry. You see that water infiltration coming really immediately, and it doesn't wash off the soil. It provides structure, so the soil becomes a sponge and very tilthy. Tilthy is like the word for crumbly, I guess, that we use in the soil world. And it also, again, cultivates that microscopic life, both bacteria, fungi, archaea, even other forms of microbiology that we may not be familiar with. It's all in there. And hopefully these are we're cultivating the beneficial ones to life. And again, improving soil tilth, water retention, and soil structure. So the second reason that we compost is to close the loop. Permaculture is all about reducing waste, using less, only because we have so much that we're creating from little, we're creating more, and we're feeding it back into the system. In a way, composting is going negative waste. We talk about zero waste, and composting is really negative waste. We're combating the waste in a positive way. So it's always good to take our cue from nature and mimic the efficient way that she handles waste, which is to recycle it. By using our waste and keeping it local, we avoid creating more carbon in the atmosphere by having the trash truck haul the garden refuse miles away. Now, we are always striving towards this, even in our own home garden. I feel guilty because I cannot compost yet. I know I have the potential to compost all my paper that I sometimes will recycle. And right now in the systems that we're building, as we're expanding our garden more and more, I find that I can incorporate a lot of the paper into the actual garden beds when I create lasagna gardens. More about that in another blog. Just search lasagna gardens. And composting when I create a bigger compost palette. So you, depending on your context, may or may not be able to use all the paper in your recycling bin. And so paper is one of those things that I think we could easily compost. The more we use non-plastic things, of course, anything plastic cannot compost. And sometimes even supposedly compostable forks and spoons, if your temperature doesn't get up to 150, I have to double check this temperature, and maybe we'll see in the down my article. Then I think those forks and spoons don't biodegrade fast enough. Um, what else? Yeah, so we keep our nutrients local, or we improve the nutrients where they belong. Instead of buying the nutrients, we are creating them for our soil. We compost to do less work, and both work. Bill Mollison used to say, he is the founder of the word permaculture, together with his student David Holmgren. Both work and pollution are the results of incorrect design or unnatural systems. So just taking a little bit more time of thinking how we see these resources around us. If we are putting them in the wrong place, they won't be of use to anybody. But if they are put in the wrong place, in the right place, we will be able to work less and relax and just let the systems take care of themselves. And what do I mean by this? Deciduous trees, for instance, shed leaves. Why do we need to haul them out from under the trees, right? As in HOA communities. We need to keep them there or use them to mulch the soil, or put them into areas that the soil needs to be mulched. They feed the soil as the leaves decompose. So how do we do all this? Now, we're hopefully by now I've sold you to like composting is good. Yes. One, just collect organic material as much as you think you can compost. Choose a composting method from below. Find a composting location outdoors, preferably. But if you have small spaces, there are ways such as bokashi that you can compost, as we'll talk about later, compost within, or you could use red wriggler worms that compost really fast, have a little bit of odor, but not so. Yeah, I would say it depends on you. Like if you have a garage, that kind of odor is fine there, but it's not so offensive. Red wriggler worms and bokashi, and that's why they're great for indoor composting. But outdoors, also, if in choosing your bins, other things eventually come in there, such as black soldier fly larvae, mealworms. If you want that, our home, we try to keep those far away as possible, and yet as convenient as we can to actually putting the compost there to the house. And we've learned from experience that mealworms got into our bins, or we had the mealworms close to our house due to feeding the chickens, and they just ate the foundation of one of our doors. So, you know what? You learn and you adjust and you put them far away where it's appropriate. Mealworms are different from red wriggler compost that do not eat the foundations. Hopefully, I don't think they do. Mealworms eat everything. Red wriggler worms, they die in the winter. So that's the other thing. Also, if you live in a more tropical climate, you got to be more aware of those things. I think if you live in the higher latitudes where you have winters and the worms die naturally and the process gets slower, you're safer to compost closer to your house. That would be my advice for the homeowner. For the farmer, you know what you're doing. you're composting as much as you can everywhere with the chickens, etc. So harvest your compost. Timelines vary from 2 weeks to 2 years or 4 years or whatnot. So composting methods to try. So here I have a few on the blog of indoor composting, as simple as applying coffee grounds to your soil or water. Okay, that can be composting. Or use pencil shavings, or cut up some fast decaying banana peels and work them into your pots. Crush up some eggshells, plant a few peas or beans from your pantry in each pot. Put the dust from sweeping your floors into the pots. Potty train your children, having them practice on indoor plants. These are very doable indoor composting techniques. And then if you're really lazy, go to Ruth Stout, who was, she calls herself the lazy gardener. And truly she was, because as she got older, she continued to compost and grow food for herself, not going to the grocery store, up until until she died. And of course, given your energy at that time of life, that's not a lot of energy to work with. Go to her if energy is the big deal. If for you, Root Stout has a bunch of, I linked to her here, videos and the book. So definitely go to her for that stuff. We use her in larger places where we can't go there all the time. Definitely, she uses a lot of straw and cuttings from her vegetation. Third, vermicomposting or worm composting. Now, personally, this is my favorite. I have worms coming in today, and I'm so excited because the main thing with the worms is they do die off, and I don't mean. I know I can keep them alive if I kept the temperatures warmer during the winter time. But in this case, I'm not sure. And I have an ongoing research project on vermicomposting. I need to get them right away situated. I'm pretty sure I already have some worms in my garden, but they're not enough for the scale and speed in which I have to conduct my research. So I'm ordering them today. That being said, they are my favorite worms to do composting with. In smaller spaces, they work in smaller spaces. Bigger spaces, they speed up the process, and they are basically the ones in charge of it. Like, I outsource the composting to them. So they're different, commercial composters. I don't actually use these ones anymore. I used to, but I use big tubs, sterilite tubs, and I think those are the best ones. Sometimes I poke holes in them, and sometimes I don't. And you poke holes in them to give aeration, since worms are aerobic, and so that there's aeration going on throughout the bin. In cases where I think there's not a potential of the bin becoming anaerobic, then I don't poke the holes. But it's a trial and error thing. I would say if you're starting out, poke the holes first. Finally, I give some advice on carbon and nitrogen ratios. Oops. In this blog. Some people say 1 is to 25, 25 to 1, part 1. So 1/3 of your compost should be, bin should be nitrogen heavy. And by nitrogen, I mean all the food scraps. By carbon, I mean all the dead leaves. So anything that's kind of brown and dry is carbony. Anything that's wet or newly harvested is nitrogeny. Newly harvested, banana peels or food scraps or harvested green matter. And I have a video here for doing that in the worm bin, maintaining carbon and nitrogen ratios in a worm bin. So if you are in a location that's very dry, I would increase the nitrogen ratio because you need more wetness in it, and you need to speed up the composting process. If you're in a location that has a lot of moisture, is tropical, more perennial, I would decrease the nitrogen and increase the carbon. So you would have to figure that out through trial and error, but we have all the support. If you need any support, we're right here with our courses, our programs, and our consultations. So definitely reach out. Cold and hot composting. So sometimes you have a large space and you can just leave them out in the open and just wait. Now, the more you turn it, the faster the composting process happens. The less you turn it, the slower it is, and yet the more stable the composting process. So if you leave a compost bin and it's in tarp, it's covered in tarp or not, and it's a big pile, and it's there curing for 3 years, you have more stable carbon, more fertile, better carbon compost product. And why I say carbon is because you allow the fungal component of the microbial life in your compost to dominate and to proliferate. With every turning, you run the risk of cutting those fungal hyphae and networks and killing that particular life form. So bacteria will dominate, fungi will still be there, but not in increased stable numbers. If you let a compost alone, you let the fungi do their work. And as they're growing, they're also processing and decomposing in a slower, more stable way. That tends to make your compost pile more acidic and also more akin for perennial growing, and doesn't mean that your bacteria is not there. I would say maybe it doesn't do it acidic, it just, because that the presence of bacteria is also there. Bacteria favors more alkaline soils, and so I would say it just makes it more neutral, more stable. So it's not just me saying this from observation. This is also from John Jevons. He has a farmer's course that you can look up on Vimeo, very, very affordable. And I would say that's where I learned it. He has a little sub course on composting and talks about the carbon in the compost that is older or aged being more stable than the one that's not. So that's where I'm getting this from. And also from observation, seeing that, oh yeah, that is the better soil than the ones that are more annual. Just as there's a different profile for annual vegetables than there are for perennial vegetables. And we often tend, here I go again, I've talked about this so much in the last few weeks, but what it surprises me that annual vegetables is the majority of what we eat in American groceries, if indeed we eat vegetables at all. It's the annuals that we're choosing from instead of more of the perennial vegetables. And so I'm encouraging you to grow more perennials, berries, woody crops, nut trees, asparagus, rhubarb, and those soils that they prefer are more on the, I've just bored you and gone off the topic, but are more on the aged compost ones. Okay, bokashi composting, another indoor version. And it's a form of fermentation, has a pungent smell, not necessarily bad, but just be ready. It's strong like kimchi. And you're using beneficial anaerobic bacteria, hopefully lactobacillus, but not necessarily always the case in this bokashi compost. And we're discovering more and more what is in here. So it's one of my favorite things to study is with the microbiome of these composts, because I'm never really sure what's in there, and so I'm sending them out for testing. That's part of my research. So what is your challenge? Choose one template to jump off from and intentionally start composting today, whether that's as simple as putting your coffee grounds in your pots or your banana peels in the soil, or going full on and building a compost palette for hot composting method. And I do have a compost streak tracker if you need one to mark when you turned your compost bin. If you want to do your compost really fast, in 18 days, you can create it just by turning your compost every other day or so. Here's some FAQs that we've been asked. How long does it take? So as I mentioned above, it depends on the method that you use. Can you compost meat and dairy? Absolutely. Anything that's organic, you can compost. But the method, again, is important. See, mealworms will eat everything, and so will yellow jackets. And they can decompose that really fast for you. I would suggest that meat and dairy, you just put in those compost piles that can really go hot so that you kill off any of the bacteria that are, growing in meat. And they have to be hot for like 3 days, 150 degrees. Oh, I can't believe I didn't put the temperature here. Did I? Oh my goodness. Something I need to add. I believe it's 155 is the National Organic Board standard for composting. What is the ideal composting method for small spaces? Vermicomposting, in my opinion. But bokashi is another one, or just simply incorporating the little scraps that you can in your pots without attracting flies. Why does my compost smell bad? It indicates too much nitrogen, because then it off gases these a lot of the energy is turned into gas that smells bad instead of the decomposition of the actual organic material. How do you know when your compost is ready? Dark, crumbly, and has an earthy smell. Do you know anything about compost tea? Yes, we have a whole research page on compost tea, and that's my 2 research projects on compost tea are there. And if you wanted to do a masterclass where you actually know the temperature for sure and other things about composting the right way and the context and videos to follow, this is a little module here that I've prepared for you all. You can sign up for this class here. And then if there's any other way that we can support you, whether you're a beginner gardener, an advanced gardener, or a master gardener that's ready to take it on, with one-on-one guidance, or somebody who just wants, one-on-one guidance, we have a course, an offering, a challenge, free, paid, and so on for you. And we even have an app. It's not here, but it's at the top of our website. So with that, I hope you have a great composting experience. Reach out at permaculturegardens@gmail.com if you have any questions about composting or you want help on your next step.